This is Liberty Law Talk, part of Liberty Fund's online library of law and liberty. Your host is Liberty Fund Fellow Richard Reinsch. Our web address is libertylawsite.org, where you can subscribe, comment, find other episodes and links related to today's conversation. Our email address is lal@libertyfund.org. Today we are talking with John Tamny about his new book, The End of Work, Why Your Passion Can Become Your Job. John Tamny is the author of Popular Economics and Who Needs the Fed. He's the director of the Center for Economic Freedom at FreedomWorks and the editor of RealClearMarkets.com. He's also a columnist for Forbes. John Tamny, you're my favorite libertarian. I'm glad to have you on the program today.
I'm flattered. I like that. I like how you qualify favorite but libertarian.
You are
maybe there aren't too many. But,
you're one of my favorites. I like The End of Work. Tell us what's going on in that book.
Well, it's a celebration of where work is going. I'm perpetually amazed that people complain so much about opportunity in the United States, and so what caused me to start writing is I went to a Fleetwood Mac concert, and I saw the joy in the eyes of the band as they were up on stage. It was contagious. And I thought, they're working incredibly hard because they're hardly working. They can't get enough of what they do. And recognizing full well that they are outliers, I thought, there's a story here more broadly, because at this time I was reading more and more about jobs that never existed in the past, things like video game players and football coach as a lifetime career on the high school level, and chefs and pastry chefs and coffee directors at restaurants. And I thought, there's a story here. As the economy grows, people get to specialize and do work that never existed in the past. And it's exciting, because when you're doing what you love, it's not work. And so I'm telling a story through real people about how work is evolving in ways that's going to lift up a lot of people, I think.
So thinking about the end of work, and it's interesting. You open with the Fleetwood Mac. I've read performing on stage, rock and roll performances is incredibly grueling work, and you say you saw the joy on their faces. So that sort of sparks in my mind this notion of it's not hard work, as you say in the book. It's not hard work when you get to do what you love. And I recognize myself in your book as I was reading it. We can talk more about this in the interview. I work hard. I come in early. I work fairly late many days, but it doesn't feel like work. Everything I'm doing is wonderful. And even the times when I'm not working, in a way, I'll get thoughts, or I'll be reading something which will crystallize the thought in my mind of something we should do at Law and Liberty. And so my job sort of never leaves my head. And a lot of people would find that, I don't know if oppressive, but too much. But yet I welcome it. Thinking about the end of work and your passion being a source of income, how truly scalable is that? Is that something for most people, or is that for weirdos like John Tamny and Richard Reinsch?
Well, the first thing I would say is I want to touch on you for a second to make a broader point. Think about what you do, and I love what you do. I love your job. Part of what you do every day is you read for a living. Yeah. And can we think about what a triumph of modern prosperity that is? Because you're not the only one I know. John Batchelor is a radio host, whom I'm sure you know or know of, and he says the same thing. He said, I read for a living. And you compare that to the past. As noted in the book, throughout the book, I tend to be very repetitive. 150 years ago when you were born, you kind of knew what you were going to do. You're going to work on a farm dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. It didn't matter if you loved it or hated it. That's what you were going to do. And so here we are. I largely read for a living too. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe how lucky I am. Yeah. And okay, so you asked the essential question, how scalable is it? I'll put it to you this way. As prosperity grows, the options to do work that people never even contemplated not too long ago grow and grow. And the reason for that is simple. As we automate away and create with fewer and fewer hands life's necessities and even life's luxuries, the demand for other things rises. And so, sorry, but you couldn't have done what you did probably in your father's generation. I think it's fair in many ways to say that I couldn't do what I do in my father's generation, but in this generation, we get to do it. And so scalable, the only limit to this, to more and more people being excited about what they do, is economic growth.
Yeah, and I think something in your book, and this is also, I think, related to the conversation you have about robots in the book, is increasing prosperity sort of increases within consumers. What we want to consume changes dramatically, diversifies, and new desires, new needs are unlocked by the growth and prosperity. And so we see this sort of proliferation of websites devoted to politics, devoted to policy, and offering, any number of perspectives on things. And same thing in sports coverage. You see that happening as well. And so there's opportunities created there, which is, I think, you and I know the job you do, the version of it in our father's generation would have been very different. There would have been fewer opportunities. It would have been in print. It would have been in newsrooms, and it's a different kind of job there, a different type of working environment than sort of the more freewheeling atmosphere we have in the online, news analysis world.
Yeah, without question. And the opportunities to do it back then were very slim. The openness, what's the word? The barriers to getting into what we do 30, 40 years ago were massive. If not for the internet, which was, let's be fair, one of the biggest job destroyers in history, I wouldn't get to do what I do. Now, to be clear, what the internet destroyed, it created much better work opportunities, much more productive work opportunities. It fascinates me where we're going. I talk about in the book that we're headed for a 4-day work week. Bank on it. That's the future. It used to be a 6-day work week for most people.
Now, John, they have a 4-day work week in Europe, in most European countries.
Well,
mandated by them. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, as I don't have to tell you, there's a 4-day work week and there's a 4-day work week in Europe. They've tried to mandate it. It never works. It just leads to economic stagnation. Market forces are going to drive it here in that because of all this automation, because of computers and the sons and daughters of computers and on, making us so much better, so much more productive at what we do, it's inevitable that businesses are going to start saying, you know what, we can be a 4-day work week company. And so you think about what that means. It's going to mean that the demand for entertainment is going to skyrocket in the generations going forward. It used to be that politicians said we're going to bring back farm jobs, and then they said we're going to bring back manufacturing jobs. I'll bet a lot of that there's going to be some witless politician in the future who says, you know what, if I'm elected, I'm going to bring back service jobs because the service jobs are gone, and they'll be gone because of economic progress. The demand for entertainment's going to grow, and we're seeing that right now. Yeah. We see it in restaurants. In the 1970s, if you became a chef, it wasn't even a professional classification. People looked at you like a failure. But as we outsource more and more of what we do, and as we demand more and more services and comforts, yes, chefs become something. It's a reasonable path in life. It's just an alternative to doctor, lawyer, and everything. I think about how exciting that is because not all of us were born wanting to be an accountant or wanting to work in a factory or wanting to work on the farm. More and more the case, we get to do things that past generations never imagined. And to be clear, our children will have opportunities that will think, wait a second, you're thinking about doing that for a job. We'll be stunned.
Well, and even thinking about, being a journalist, 50 or 60 years ago, my understanding, it wasn't necessarily the haunt of the most educated. Or the most highly pedigreed of person, educationally speaking, or socially, economically speaking. But it's become that in a way. If you look at the journalists in Washington, and those who are commenting on the news in any type of way, it tends to be the case that highly educated and but have chosen a path that allows them to pursue, as you're saying, what they most love, which is talking about politics and policy. Your book, you have a lot of concrete information, details, examples in there. Talk about college football. You have sort of and it's interesting. I think you and I both share this in common. We love college football. Um, and it's interesting. You say college football players should major in college football, and then you go on to talk about why that is the case. Now, a conference that I follow, the Southeastern Conference, just concluded its media days, which are there's nothing. Everybody wants to talk about college football in the South, but there's really not that much to talk about in the summer except for this event in Birmingham, Alabama called SEC Media Days, where all of the coaches come together to talk about their teams and what they hope for in the season. And this is covered in the South intensely. And all of the coaches just said they talked about their graduation rates and they talked about their students' academic performance and all this sort of business. You say, from an economics perspective, that's beside the point.
Oh, totally beside the point. Let's get serious here. For one, football is an incredibly cerebral sport.
Yeah, talk about that's interesting too. Yeah.
It may be that you and I, if we were going to have a policy conversation with Tony Romo and Marcus Mariota and Michael Vick and Jameis Winston, and let's think of an SEC quarterback. Who's the guy? He's with the Carolina Panthers. His name escapes me. Played for Auburn.
Yeah, yes.
Great quarterback.
Yeah.
Well, if we were to have a policy conversation with them, there's no doubt that you and I would be the smartest ones in the room.
Yeah.
But these guys, they're so brilliant that they can really memorize in split-second fashion phone book size playbooks at which they know so well that they can do them in split-second fashion with 300-pounders coming after them trying to basically put them into the hospital. These guys have immense skills. It's just a different kind. And so I first asked the question, if someone talented to have a college give them something to go to that school that's worth easily hundreds of thousands of dollars, why shouldn't they focus all of their energies on it? And that's especially true because if they prove really good at it, they'll wind up in the NFL, and their income coming out of college will dwarf that of their fellow classmates. Now, at this point, I get it. Listeners are thinking this guy's nuts. Mm-hmm. But wait a second, because they'll say, okay, a very small percentage of college football players make the NFL. Okay, true. But we don't criticize business majors for focusing on business classes, even though an even smaller percentage of them will ever get a job at Goldman Sachs, let alone interview there.
Yeah.
We don't criticize English and journalism majors for focusing on those courses, even though an even smaller percentage will ever write a fiction book that anyone reads or work at the New York Times. Yet we automatically, you football players, you've got to prepare for the future. You've got to prepare for life without football. And I say, wait a second, oh, really? Because tell me, what do you think's more valuable? What do you think opens more doors with an interview for a job after college? That you got an A in business class at Alabama, or that you played for Nick Saban? I mean, let's be fully honest. What is going to open doors? Who's going to be more interested? Oh, you played for Kirby Smart, really? Oh, but you got an A in business class, really? Oh, wow. Okay. And what's going to be more valuable to a grad of Alabama? Oh, that you got an A in accounting class, or you spent extra time in the film room and scored a touchdown against Auburn.
Yeah. So
let's look at Stanford.
Yeah. So thinking about all of that, what you go on to say in the book is the amount of, there's because, as football has emerged, particularly college football has emerged as such a widespread sport and a sport that people intensely follow and will spend money to follow in any number of ways. There's a proliferation of jobs there that those college football players that's actually their best market opportunity, is to find for those who are really intensely love their sport. That's their best market path forward. And so, as you talk about high school coaches, you talk about the number of jobs in and around the football industry that are just there now that weren't there before. And you surprised me the number of high school coaches that are paid six figures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's staggering.
Which shouldn't be
You know,
surprising. It shouldn't be surprising. I mean, because what I've noticed too in watching college football, which didn't seem to be true when I was growing up, is the pipeline of coaches who go from, a large high school in Georgia or Texas into a pretty major job in the college level game is happens a lot now. Yeah.
yeah, it's got to be stressed that, okay, obviously if you don't make the NFL, if you played for a team, you're going to have access to arguably the most accomplished alums of that school, and so focusing on football is going to set you up well for any kind of job after. But yes, thinking specifically about football, this is crucial. When Bill Belichick got into assistant coaching in the NFL, he was $25 a week assistant. You kind of had to have another thing going on back then, players and coaches alike. Well, nowadays, let's face it, the NFL is littered with assistant coaches who earn the million. Okay, and so people will say, very elite, get it, got your point. But then let's go down to the collegiate level. Boise State is hardly an SEC school, yet Boise State in 2014, just its assistant coach budget annually was $2 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
At SEC, as you know, it's pointed out in the book, the average assistant pay in the SEC is $447,000 a year. And people will say, okay, that's the top football conference. We get it. But if you look throughout FBS, the top division for college, average assistant earns $253,000 a year.
Yeah.
And people say, okay, well, that's college, fine, but and so let's go down to the high school level. I mean, these are dated statistics at this point, but in the Houston Metroplex alone, there are 14 high school coaches in the six figures. It's interesting, in the book, I point out the state of Georgia alone has 23 high school coaches who are in the six figures. That is now a dated statistic. The latest from USA Today is 36 high school coaches, football coaches in the state of Georgia alone, earn over $100,000. And so, again, we're talking about a cerebral sport. Why do we tell people not to focus on their passion? And we thankfully live in a time and place where people who grew up loving football can make a very nice, remunerative career out of it, and yet we discourage them learning what they're brilliant at.
Now moving beyond sort of conventional sports, which you talk about in the book, gaming. Which I had no idea until recently, the number of people who watch gaming as a spectator sport. I mean, and I think it rivals the NFL, you say in the book. And that's another aspect of this sort of intense, video gaming, which something that kids do, we used to think of, has now become in its own right an explosive, remunerative career technological opportunity for people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the funnest, other than writing this book, one of the fun things about it was researching it because, like you, I had no idea. And then the more you read, oh, yeah, it turns out more people watch gaming and go on to Twitch.com than they do to MLB and NBA.com. It's a hugely popular spectator sport. Spectators fill up Staples Center and Madison Square Garden. And, yes, turns out video gaming is now a job. It's a seven-figure job for some. The NBA just staged a draft. This is not in the book because it's more modern information. They just staged a draft not for basketball players, for video game players. The NBA 2K League starting pay there is lower. It's $35,000 a year. You get a housing stipend, relocation bonus. But think about this. Think about what a triumph this is, because when you and I were growing up, if we had told people, yeah, I'm going to play video games professionally for a living, people would have said, they would have said something probably negative about our parents and that we also had a substance abuse problem. And then if we'd said, oh, yeah, we're going to become video game coaches someday, which is now a profession, it pays $50,000 plus, people would have said, okay, these guys need to be committed. But this is now real, and it's an effective prosperity, and it's effective people because the jobs pay so well and they're not as backbreaking, and because they don't take up all of our lives, the demand for entertainment grows and grows. And so an outgrowth of this entertainment economy where I think we're headed is that, yes, people will get to make a career out of their love of video game, and it's beautiful.
Now, let me sort of think about this now. I guess I'm, as someone inclined towards conservative thinking, what does all this? I mean, what does all this mean? I mean, what I'm getting at is, people, I mean, is everyone truly creative? And one of the things that as I read your book, and this memory came back to me my senior year of high school. I worked on a loading dock at a manufacturing facility. We made outdoor patio furniture. And as I looked around the factory, I thought this is a small town. It was a factory in a small town, but large. I mean, it was a manufacturing facility that sent goods and services throughout the country, or these goods throughout the country. As I thought about that, these people, I think, reading your book, I think, and I think this is true. A lot of people, the last thing in the world they're looking to is sort of be creative and find a way to make money from it. And as I think about that, and I think about sort of prevailing, we'll say headwinds in our country, because your title of your book is "The End of Work," and the prevailing political economic narrative now is we don't have enough work, or we don't have, which is hard to say because our unemployment rate is pretty low right now, but we don't have enough work that allows people to live sort of dignified lives. You hear that a lot, and to support their families and all that sort of stuff. Um, as I listen to and thinking about the type of work that would emerge in this world you're describing, uh, it seems to me it's hard to see it being something that could really support people. It seems to me people would have to be able to juggle a lot of different jobs to make it happen, which means some discipline, some creativity on their part in how they manage their work. Is all that really possible? And maybe I'm just sort of limited in my own thinking, but is that a future we could really believe in? Can we really believe in the future of everybody's a Lyft driver, or not everybody, but people are able to make a living from being a Lyft driver or the equivalent? Is that a future we can believe in? Can it sustain a middle class society? What do you say?
Oh, I think without question it can. There's no limits to growth, and because there's no limits to growth, there's no limits to how we do things. I mean, I'd like to address your question within that. Are all people creative? I think so. I think if anyone listening to this were to really ask themselves and ask the people, everyone's good at something. Everyone's probably good at a lot of things. And so the way to look at this is to, again, consider it through the prism of 150 years ago. I think I would have been viewed as lazy and not very smart and just kind of an object of pity in the farming economy. Warren Buffett, of course, acknowledges as much if we were a sports-based economy. Mm-hmm. How could someone like Buffett showcase his brilliance in a sports-based economy? I mean, as he points out, he would have been a flop if that had been his only option. If my only option had been farming, I would have been a flop. And so I think within that, we have to say, yeah, we look around, you and I can look around and say, we can point to lots of intelligent, talented people. But how many of them would have been viewed as such 150 years ago? And I think the answer is exceedingly few, because the ways in which to be a star then were very limited. And so can this sustain more and more people? I think without question. And it's why I think that people should just cheer on automation that they're told to fear. If it's true that robots are set to lay waste to all sorts of different forms of work, can you imagine what work is going to look like in the future? It's going to be amazing, because let's be clear, fertilizer and the tractor destroyed more jobs than probably any advance in history. They took the world off of the farm. Yeah. But as opposed to putting us into bread lines, they freed up a lot of people whose talents had previously been suffocated. Think about what future automation will do. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think about, you think about the Industrial Revolution, people were very willing to leave the farm to go work in pretty oppressive factory conditions, 12, 15 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week. People were willing to do that. They ran to those opportunities. I understand that. But at the same time, and your point is well taken about fertilizing the tractor and the opportunities that created. I guess, but there was also a huge disruption story there also, a political disruption story that the Industrial Revolution created. You don't see that happen necessarily with robots. I mean, I take your economic point. I agree with you. I mean, robots come on, it'll probably unlock a lot of new opportunities, new jobs we didn't even know existed before, and so that's wonderful and that's great. But there seems like there are a lot of short-term disruptions also that loom. Or Or am I not taking into account, this will be sort of a bit by bit process. It's not the case that 4 million people are going to go unemployed the next day, but it'll happen slowly over time because technological change usually is kind of slow.
Well, great question. First of all, I think it will be fast. Let's hope it's fast. But I think you're right. I think certainly there are going to be political implications to this. As I observed earlier, I think we're going to get to the point where politicians are literally going to say, we're going to bring back service jobs. They used to give people a life of dignity and all this stuff. And I think it's so valid what you say that people raced from farming to these factories because it's so interesting. Everything that I read about Aliquippa and some of the factory towns that are no longer prosperous is that the people who worked in those mills were desperate that their kids would not do what they did. And they kept stressing, you do not want to be where I am. And so it fascinates me when politicians say they're going to bring back these factory jobs that people didn't, at least the people doing them weren't necessarily thrilled about doing. But certainly there will be implications because literally I think automation as a rule is going to lay waste to all sorts of old forms of work.
Okay.
Here's the one difference I would say, though, and this is crucial. The parts of the U.S. that are exposed to this automation quickest will be the ones least politically disrupted. It's the ones not exposed that are in trouble because they're the ones, and we know why this is. There's this notion that globalization is destroying towns across the U.S. No. It's the towns least exposed to the globalization that are being destroyed. Because, and we know why this is true. Where do talented people go? They don't want to work in factories. They don't want to do the jobs in the past. And so where they go, investment follows. Let's face it, New York City and Los Angeles used to be 1 in 4 in the U.S. as manufacturing cities. They thrive today precisely because globalization moved the factories out. And so the towns and cities that moved the jobs that passed out quickest, job opportunities will be endless. Those who stick around or who stay in the places where robots are impacting them the most slowly, that's where the political disruption will be, not where it's happening.
Now, your analysis calls to my mind Tyler Cowen's provocative book, Average is Over, from a few years back, which argues that the robotization phenomenon will dramatically increase inequality for reasons that aren't hard to imagine. That certain people will capture the technology, will use it, and will benefit from it. Either not just the scientists, but those who can manage it, market, and distribute the services, the capital, the technology that the nerds produce. They also will benefit tremendously. But that a lot of other people will just sort of fall by the wayside. Their talents and skills won't be needed in the same way. But Callan says that's okay. They can move to Texas. It's cheap there, and they can have cheap Mexican food and have their screens and be placated by that. So I guess there's also his argument is, you should get your response to it, inequality will be driven by this process, which that is sort of the problem with globalization. Is the benefits have gone to very talented people in an incredible way. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it has sort of, it's produced this widening, political problem in our country, in that people in the bottom half of the income distribution haven't seen their lot improve in any significant way in decades. And so this is sort of leading to this sort of combustible, political process.
Well, the first thing I would say is, I certainly hope inequality rises. I hope it soars.
Okay.
Who is anyone hurt because Paul McCartney makes music that the world wants to listen to? Is anyone kept up at night because LeBron James is better and much more intelligent at basketball than anyone in the world? How many listening have an Apple product, or have a Dell product, or who have purchased something on Amazon in the past month? We know the answers to that. These are all rich people, extraordinarily unequal people. How many people listening would say, if someone cures paralysis, we should hide that because that person will become rich for doing it? And how many people would blanch at the notion of a capitalist economy leading to the creation of 100 Steve Jobs, 100 Jeff Bezos, 100 Michael Dells. I don't think any sane person would say that would be a bad scenario. So yes, of course, all inequality is a sign that talented people are meeting the needs of more and more people. And so as technology grows, that just shrinks the world. If you want to get rid of inequality, just abolish the internet. You will get rid of equality extraordinarily quickly.
Yeah.
Because someone like Jeff Bezos could serve a much smaller. I would just add, I think this is crucial. I think you probably accept this. The notion that inequality causes people those with less talent to stagnate or live in place is untrue. As wealth inequality grows, the lifestyle inequality shrinks, and it shrinks remarkably. I think the models suggesting that there's wage stagnation in the United States defy basic common sense. If that were true, imports into the United States would be plummeting. In fact, they're soaring as businesses around the world fight to meet the needs of the American people. That's not a sign of wage stagnation. So yes, I think inequality is going to be a huge part of it. Where I strongly disagree with Cowan is in his assertion that we're heading toward a complacent class because of this. No. Where we're headed as these talented people create all these advances is that opportunities for people previously suffocated or previously forced to do backbreaking work are going to proliferate. And so we're actually going to see a harder working population, people passionate about their work, more and more people thinking probably like you and I do that we never want to retire because we love what we do so much.
Now, and I don't want to put words in, say, Tyler Cowen's mouth, but as I understand his book, I think his claim is average is over, and I think it's sort of a hierarchical claim. There only are so many people with certain skill sets, and so many don't have the intellectual talent, cognitive ability to thrive in the robot economy that you're articulating. And or to be a part of it in some certain way, and that so their fortunes will just be they'll be marginal, they'll be over here on the side, and the benefits really are going to continue to accrue to a certain elite set. I know you disagree with that, but I think that's his claim. So I totally accept, and I think he would accept what you're saying. In the way you described, I want Steve Jobs, I want Bill Gates, and all that. I get that, but that's all contingent upon there being a lot of remunerative work available or being sort of generated in this process. And I think many are arguing that's not the case.
He's arguing that, but he's making an argument and making the implicit assertion that the jobs of today reflect the jobs of tomorrow. And I think as our discussion has revealed fairly powerfully, I think, in fact, they don't. And so with all this prosperity, what happens is the ways in which people can showcase their talents in the workforce explode. Again, who could have predicted? I doubt Cowan's books, even from a few years ago, predicted that there were going to be all these people who would be superstars as video game players. No. There are quite literally hedge funds proliferating now in which people, they're being seeded with money to bet on sports contests. There are, the number of jobs there aren't just diet consultants for humans anymore, but they're diet consultants for the family pet. The list goes on. So I think he gets it very backwards. I think what's going to happen, as we've discussed today, look at all the ways in which formerly marginalized people are able to showcase their skills in the marketplace. If, in fact, automation takes hold and massive inequality results, watch out for people who once had to do what you and I might consider backbreaking work, getting to do something that they love uncontrollably such that they get to be intelligent too.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I guess thinking about this, this process, the show from a few years back, you don't hear too much about anymore, but Duck Dynasty, which is, basically a family of, backwoods Louisiana types who become multimillionaires several times over making hunting equipment, which undoubtedly was their passion, as revealed on the reality TV show. You have, thinking about, you say education is overrated. why do you say that? And is it sort of related to this phenomenon of why would we need formal education if everything is sort of rapidly changing? That sort of puts that to myth.
Well, let me answer it in backwards fashion. Let me first say that I think where we're going, college education is going to become more and more popular. And it's going to be because it was never about education in the first place. It's always been about people trying to separate themselves, seeking exclusivity, parents seeking exclusivity. And so in a prosperous society, and I think we're rich as we are, the wealth of tomorrow is going to make the present look very small by comparison. There will be all sorts of parents giving massive amounts of money to schools. And so I don't see them going away. I've never bought this notion that the internet is going to disrupt. Oh, please. No, people are going there to meet, make friends, make contacts, meet a wife, husband, you name it. College is always going to be big time, particularly in the U.S. Okay, so having established that, does it mean anything to economic growth? No. We have the best schools in the world because we're a rich country, not vice versa. And my explanation for it in the book is China. China has become, it's still a very poor country, but it's on the way to great wealth. And it's done that largely on the backs of people who had very little college education, very little education at all. What drove it is that suddenly they were economically free. The talent was always there, but had been suffocated by the state. Once they were free, they were able to create all sorts of wealth. They'll, of course, send their kids to college, and they do at present en masse in the United States. And then let's get down to the anecdotal. It is interesting. That's my chapter about music, is you look at someone like Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Now, let me ask you one question on education. I mean, let's say, so you and I both would agree, I would love to get rid of federal loans. Now, that's incredibly hard to do. There's probably no will to do that. But if you would get out of federal loans, you get out accreditation of education by various bodies certified to do that. And then you think about this sort of economic story you're telling. I mean, that could really shake up how higher education works in America.
See, I question how much.
I mean, the middle class largely send their kids to school, on these federal loans, and either their kids take on the debt or the parents will, nicely take on the debt. But if that goes away, then I assume demand goes dramatically down.
I think what you would see under the scenario you describe is a lot of the more expensive but less named schools that people have never heard of might disappear.
Yeah.
But I think what you wouldn't see is too much of a change in demand for the name schools, the Power 5 conference schools, public, private, you name it. My strong sense, certainly, at Harvard level, the demand is...
sure. Yeah.
Is inelastic. Okay, that's a given. But I'll wager that as prosperity grows, even some of the let's throw out Mississippi State, maybe a less academically prestigious SEC school. I think you're going to see demand for that skyrocket, even among the middle classes, because it was never about the education. It was always about, I'm going there, and people at least implicitly understood, if not never explicitly, that you're going there to make friends, make contacts, and everything. And so, I think even if you got rid of federal loans, that there would be lots of demand for these schools, and it wouldn't just be for the Ivy League. It'd be much lower than that. A friend of mine is a professor at Baylor, and he said, "I guess this is going to disappear." And I said, "No, you're dreaming.
Yeah.
Look at these kids here. Their parents have them going there. They're willing to go into debt for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with education." And so I think we overrate. My take is that our side overrates. I'd love to get rid of federal loans. I don't think they serve any purpose, but I think our side overrates what an impact it would have on colleges and universities.
Yeah. So your point then being, which I think is well taken, education is a consequence and offshoot of wealth.
You put it so well. Exactly. That's exactly my point. We have all this because we're the richest country on earth that didn't make it. In future generations, China, the same thing. All this wealth created. People are going to start putting money. It's just a favorite of rich people. They like to donate to things like this, and colleges are one of them. our colleges are an effect of this. If they actually taught, they couldn't possibly teach us about how to work in the working economy simply because our economy is too dynamic. The notion that a professor would know the skills we need for the future when it's unknowable is just laughable. But we go for different reasons, and I think we'll continue to go for different reasons. Colleges are not going away.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you and I mean, you have an MBA. I have a law degree. My experience in law school is it should be 1 year. If you're actually going to be a practicing lawyer, most of what you need is you learn doing it. The first year, the best class I took in law school was really research and writing. MBA program, I think it's a lot of people would argue the best part about the MBA is who you meet. You would probably agree with that.
No question.
There's probably not a lot of applied learning or something like that. But so you and I are both products of that. I'm still paying my loans on that.
Me too.
And yet, but we do it. The law degree is sort of mandated legally, to sit for the bar or to be considered for employment. But the MBA, not so much. But it's sort of a signal that you send to move up or to be seen as sort of upper level talent in various business in the world. So, so it's still, that's all there. But this seems to me it's incredibly economically inefficient. But yet we still do it. Yeah.
We do it. It's funny. Isn't it ironic that college football is the one thing that you reasonably need to do to make the NFL?
Yeah.
These other things, the business world's littered with great talents who never got a business degree, or some who didn't go to college. And one of my favorite law stories, it probably comes from someone I think you may know or know of, George Leaf.
Yeah.
He went to Duke Law, but he was talking about some friend of his who went to Harvard Law, big-time attorney in New York at a major firm. And he asked him the question, okay, I give you 25 kids who got into Harvard Law but decided not to go, and I give you 25 Harvard Law grads, whom do you hire? And his answer, as you can imagine, it wouldn't make any difference to me. They both fit what I'm trying to do. And so, we do it to separate themselves. It's a signaling device, but it's not a requirement to succeed. Certainly not in where this economy is going, which I think more and more it's going to be that your unique talents are going to be what's rewarded in the marketplace.
Now, thinking about your book here, is that you talk about millennials are going to be okay. You said in this economy, conventional narrative is they're in trouble. They're this strange generation. They put off getting married. They put off having children. In my personal experience with some millennials, they've graduated from college and have not really found full-time work right away and didn't really seem to be bothered by this, whereas I would have been profoundly bothered by it and would have been made to feel bothered by it by my parents. One thing is, I think there is an economic reason for that, at least around the 2008 era. But also, it sort of brings to mind, just you say prosperity is an unalloyed good thing, and that it is going to drive this economy you're talking about. Does prosperity, though, does it, and I've wondered this with the millennials, and then people used to say this about the baby boomers when they were coming out of college, that somehow growing up in a prosperous, comfortable age, human nature being what it is, it seems to undermine the discipline needed to make a market capitalist economy thrive.
That's what's always assumed. As the book argues, the millennials will be the richest generation in the history of the richest nation in the history of the world until the generation that follows them eclipses their economic achievements. To answer the question, I take you back to something.
I just want to think about that for a minute. I hope that's true. But yet, a lot of people would just say, look at the millennials and look at Generation X, the same age, or same rough span in their careers, and it's actually Gen X that's achieved better outcomes at that stage in their career. That somehow there is a sense that millennials have fallen behind. Go ahead.
But I think two crucial things that need to be said about this. I'm Generation X, and when I got out of college, it was assumed that we were entitled and spoiled and unfocused. They made movies about us, Reality Bites, Singles, Slacker. There was a book written about Generation X, about this generation that was going to underperform its parents. All the same things they're saying about millennials. They live with their parents, no focus and everything. Generation X became the richest generation yet. It helped in many ways author the internet boom, among other amazing things. Then let's go back to an important pamphlet called Get the Message to Garcia. Military members who are listening have no doubt read it. It's required reading when you join the military. This businessman was writing about young people in America in the late 1800s, and he described them as imbecilic, lazy. As he put it, whenever you tell them to do something at work, they say, "That's not in my job description." What does that sound like? It sounds like what we describe millennials as today. Mm-hmm. The point here is that every younger generation seems spoiled and entitled and socialistic and all these things. It's called economic progress. We live in a country so prosperous that it's only natural to look at those who grew up in this lap of luxury and say, wow, they just don't get it. They don't get how hard it is. But invariably, they figure things out. And so if it were true that millennials were just not going to do anything and live with their parents for the rest of their lives, this would show up in businesses. They wouldn't be trying to meet their needs. They wouldn't be marketing towards them. In the case of the hotel industry, every major hotel brand wouldn't be feverishly developing brands just for the millennial generation. What does that tell you? Yeah. It tells you that market signals totally disagree with this perception that millennials are going to fail. Are they starting later? Well, of course they can, and here's why. The path to wealth and achievement is so much quicker in a technologically advanced economy. I bring you to Kylie Jenner. Now, she's not even millennial, but she, within 2 years, little under 3 years, has created a business that is conservatively valued at $800 million. She did it without any of the traditional building of infrastructure because she's able to build it on Instagram. Rest assured, these younger generations are going to become staggeringly rich and improve the world in amazing ways because they know the technology best. And they will use it, and they understand it in ways that are going to enhance living standards, enhance our lives in wonderful ways. Don't worry about the millennials. People have been trash-talking younger generations for at least going back to the 1800s in the United States. They've always been wrong.
So you want to lead with the Kylie Jenner example.
Well, she's in the book. I like to see that. I like to think that I discovered her before Forbes did. But look, do the Kardashians offend me to no end? Okay, it's gross and everything, and we could go on and on about that. But isn't it interesting? People have been saying this about young people for a long, long time. And it's just never been true. People who've been betting against the United States, you could fill many Rose Bowls with them. And they've missed out on some amazing advances. And I don't think, unless people know something that the rest of the world doesn't, I wouldn't want to be betting against this generation.
All right. Well, so with that, John Tamny, we'll bring this conversation to an end. We're talking with John Tamny, the author of The End of Work, Why Your Passion Can Become Your Job. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. What a great interview. This was so much fun. You do this very well.
Hey,
you clearly are living the end of work.
All right. Thank you. This is your host, Richard Greinch, and you have been listening to a podcast that can be found at libertylawsite.org, where you can subscribe, comment, and find other episodes and links related to today's conversation. Our email address is lal@libertyfund.org.